There are still some absolute classics in this list, but after the last few videos, I've never been more relieved to see the bubble burst.
Serenity now, and sanity later.
Today we are ranking close to 30 death metal albums from 1994, and we're starting with Bolt Thrower and For Victory. The riffs continue to get more interesting and memorable from previous efforts, in my opinion, helping each song stand apart on this one. The 1-2 punch of War and Remembrance makes for a particularly potent opening with those kind of carcassy guitar harmonies mixed with the grindy chorus. Lots of head-bobbing grooves that at times have an almost Sepultura-sounding vibe. Graven Image even has some very tribal-sounding drums, which also lines up since Chaos AD was released just a year before this. Easily one of my overall standout favorites in their discography. It is going to perfection. Then we have Convulse with Reflections. Album number 2 from this Finnish band, and unfortunately it's a far cry from the debut. I was on the fence about even including it, but there's just enough growling and death metal instrumentation for it to scrape by. And what I was referring to in the intro is, as I was going through for this list, it does feel like this is the year that many bands went goth or alternative, much like what happened to thrash metal around 1990-91. And on top of that, black metal was reaching new heights at this time with the likes of In the Nightside Eclipse, Transylvanian Hunger, Vistar Oss, and Viklin Veldi all coming out this same year. But anyways, on this album, expect a lot of bluesy rock riffs and some more kind of epic metal vocals too. Not really digging it personally, and this being a death metal tier list, it's an easy bottom of the list pick for me, so it is going to meh.
Not good.
Then we have Cryptopsy with Blasphemy Made Flesh. The mix on this thing is crazy raw, which makes for a very destructive listen from this first time full length from this Canadian band. Songs feel more like forces of nature than music, just pure primal rage being channeled into the instruments. It's far from the best death metal debut I've heard, but it's definitely ranking amongst the heaviest for me. And then later on it opens up into some melodic, again carcassy sounding parts with Serial Messiah. Unfortunately the guitars can get a bit washed out at times, but the pingy snare tone and primacy sounding bass are great. Definitely check out the Cryptopsy discography tier list I did recently, really had fun with that, but this debut, it's going to amazing. Then we have Brutality with When the Sky Turns Black. Also album 2 from this Florida crew, starting on a bit of a weak point though, in my opinion. Once the transition happens though on Race Defects, they had more of my attention. Solid use of dynamics and atmosphere, even getting kind of pretty with Awakening and Esoteric. Riffs and vocals can be a bit generic, but it did keep me on my toes with some of the more abrupt stylistic shifts as with Electric Funeral. So splitting the difference on this one, it's going to good. Then we have Incantation with Mortal Throne of Nazarene. Big switch in production here from that cavernous sound to a more tinny kind of thin sound that I don't think complements their approach quite as effectively. Even so, the songs here are pretty rad and also I'd say a step up in dynamics. Some nice transitions too, with Essence Ablaze lulling you in with that hypnotic head bob effect before pulling out the rug and beating you to death with blast beats. All said and done, I think I actually like this one just a little bit more than the debut. It is going to great tier on this list. Then we have Asphyx with Asphyx. Going full doom for this one, which is a bummer for me. I like when the band does death metal, but when they slow things down, it is just boring in my opinion. There are still some D-beat sections and occasional use of synth, but nothing to write home about. That's a big ask for me too, at almost an hour for this one. I've heard far worse, but it's just not really for me, so this one landed at okay tier. And again, remember, this is just my opinion, and also if you're enjoying the video, please hit the like button and comment where do you agree, where do you disagree. Let's get a conversation going down there. I like hearing other people's like well-rounded opinions and why they feel the way they do about albums. But next up we have At the Gates with Terminal Spirit Disease. Now this is where they really establish their trademark sound, setting themselves up for the seminal Slaughter of the Soul. Title track is a banger, The Beautiful Wound is solid, and I dig the violin and cello on And the World Returned. One of my personal favorites from them and on this list, but given that it's more of a glorified EP that the label tacked some live songs onto to make it a full length, I can't quite put it in perfection, so it's going to fantastic. Then we have Edge of Sanity with Purgatory Afterglow. Incredible album with the band only further coming into their own after the previous year's The Spectral Sorrows. It's incredibly focused, yet at the same time toys with a lot of different styles. At times it's a clear influence on Amon Amarth, some epic clean vocals on Blood Colored, but then it goes death metal Motorhead, going the Jester Race before the Jester Race on Black Tears, of Darksome Origin, Elegy, Enter Chaos, and Silent Rip, and the duo soloing on the latter is just so much fun. Banger of a record, easily a favorite here. It is going to perfection. Then we have Messiah with Underground. The final 90s album from this Swiss band who split soon after this but recorded a new record in 2020. Another one that kind of straddles the death metal label. There's elements of their old sound as well as melodeath, but the vocals here, now provided by Christopher Johnson instead of Andy Kana, have more of a kind of crossover vibe to them. Pretty disappointing, honestly, as I really like their other stuff, and this is a fall similar to how I feel about Entombed's later albums in comparison to Left Hand Path. I can see why it has a 6.6 on Metal Storm. It is going to meh tier.
Look what they did to my boy. They massacred my boy.
Then we have Amorphis with Tales from the Thousand Lakes. What I would consider to be the best of this Finnish band's early material, even if I prefer their later stuff overall. Another great atmospheric intro here with Thousand Lakes before getting a little doomy and gloomy with Into Hiding. It starts off great, but when the cleans come in, it does kind of ruin it for me at times. I like cleans in Melodeath, especially like Dark Tranquility and Insomnium, but these are just not very good for objectively, I would say. Really impressive atmosphere and folky kind of early in flame sounding guitars, but the songwriting and again some of the performances could use a little bit of work. It's still good enough for me to put it at great tier. Then there's Altar with Youth Against Christ. The debut LP from this Netherlands band focused on themes of atheism and anti-Christianity, in case you didn't get that from the title. Fast, ferocious stuff with no bells or whistles, which I think makes each song stand pretty strong on its own, but it does make for some tedium over its 48 minutes. There are some pace changes, like on Jesus is Dead, and I like when the bass comes front and center. A bit meat and potatoes, but I'd say overall it fits at like okay. Then we have Cenotaph with Riding Our Black Oceans. With their second record, this Mexican band takes a turn for melodic death metal with some pretty interesting results. More at-the-gate sounding inspirations here, though the execution feels a little bit sloppier. Even so, I'm rarely bored and certainly find myself more entertained by this than a lot of the more basic stuff on this list, and I feel like songs only get better as it goes along, with Macabre, Locust, Celesta, and Among the Abrupt being some of my favorites here. It is going to amazing. Then we have Gorement with The Ending Quest. The first and as of now only full-length album from this Swedish band, making it a rare debut on this list. There are a few, but I feel like fewer than on previous ones. It feels like, again, newer bands were getting started in death metal at this point because people were just more focused on other things. But we will get a surge again if we continue on with this list, I assure you. Pretty doomy, but better paced than some of the competition here. Might compare it most to the Bolt Thrower sound. Solid drumming, too. I'm going to put this one at good tier. God, it does not want to cooperate with me right now. Anyways, we have In Flames with Lunar Strain. So while I said in my In Flames discography tier list, which you should also check out, by the way, I think that they have way better albums than this one. This is a killer debut, though, and within the context of this year especially, it's easily among the best. I also think that Michael Stan is a much stronger vocalist than Anders, so having him here makes for an even more impressive outing. Pretty unmatched atmosphere on this list, from the guitar work to the synths to the classical strings, right down to the production. Behind Space is an incredible opener, and I also love the almost thrashy Upon an Oaken Throne. Given where most most of death metal was at this point. That must have exploded a few heads when they heard it for the first time. I wouldn't quite call it perfection, but the argument could certainly be made. I'm ultimately putting it at fantastic. Then we have Septicflesh with Mystic Places of Dawn. The debut from one of my favorite modern death metal bands. These Greeks, in my opinion, do some of the best symphonic death metal around these days, but these early works don't take quite that orchestral turn for some time. Even so, I love the atmosphere that you can only seem to get from Greece, with some parallels in guitar work with like Rotting Christ. And Spyros is easily one of my all-time favorite death metal vocalists, with that insanely deep growl that I can pick out of a lineup instantly. Great mix of death, doom, and progressive with stunning keyboards. Absolutely loved revisiting this thing so much that I went out and I actually bought this awesome 4-pack of their first 4 albums, because I already own most of their modern material, but I was like, you know what, I've not been kind enough to their early works and I want to support them with that. So anyways, this one is going to perfection. Then there's Mortification with Blood World. Another how far they fall moment for me going through these albums, which is disappointing because I do love that title. It's like a Metalocalypse title.
Blood Ocean. I know who you are!
Great drumming, but the guitars are annoying, and goddamn, the vocals just plain suck. Like, I don't know what happened to Steve here, but he really went a bad direction on this one, in my opinion. I want to stab my eardrums when I hear it. Another all-time low score here, too, on Metal Storm with a 6.9. So, yeah, this one is going to meh.
Oh, that's brutal.
Then we have Aggressor with Symposium of Rebirth. This is the third full length from this French death and thrash metal band that we have not covered on previous lists, but again, I was overwhelmed with releases, y'all. Like 40 plus gets pretty dicey. But yeah, this one kicks off on a fairly typical note, but just a few minutes in, we already get a surprise melodic twist with flutes and female backing vocals. Twists like that always catch my attention, but I will say that the execution of navigating between those, the thrashier riffs, the progressive sections, and the more traditional caveman OSDM feels a little bit clunky. Even so, interesting, unique, and memorable listen, so I'm putting this one at great tier. Then we have Grave with Solace. The third album from these Swedes, continuing to carry that classic old-school Swedish sound, but slowing things down a bit more and adding more groove, making tracks like I Need You super infectious. Like, honestly, I was listening to this in the car and I was bobbing my head all the way through it, all the way home. Consistent, just like vibing music. Rain has a little Carcass again in it too. I'm going to put this one at fantastic. It almost made perfection. Then we have Infester with To the Depths in Degradation. One of the other few debut albums on this list, and a particularly grimy one at that, with this one album Seattle, Wisconsin band covering all forms of taboo topics. I saw some high praise for this on Metal Archives with plenty of scores in the 90s, but frankly, I don't really get that. I've never been one for the endless blur kind of vocals, and these riffs aren't exactly ambitious either. It does have some gnarly speed and aggression that I can appreciate, so ultimately I put it at good. Like, I think it's enjoyable. I think it's a solid album, as are most of the ones on this list, even the ones I don't like as much. It's just that I don't understand the hype I saw on those reviews. Then we have The Chasm with Procreation of the Inner Temple. The debut album from this Mexican band, though apparently now based out of Chicago, and featuring Daniel Corchado, who does vocals on my favorite Incantation album. We've talked about him on these lists before. Unfortunately, I like that album a lot more than this one. More meandering, death doom. I want to like it if for no other reason than loving that cover art, but I'm just not really feeling it. I will give it credit for having a somewhat unique atmosphere, so it wasn't quite at the bottom. I put it at okay. Then there's Obituary with World Demise. Around this album in their discography, the word passable started to come to mind to me when I was doing this discography tier list. It's not an unenjoyable thing to listen to by any means, but it's just not offering a ton of new substance either. I will say that they do a good job of capturing the dreary tone of the album cover with the sludginess of the guitar mirroring the choking air pollution, and I dig the hypnotic groove of tracks like Don't Care. Ultimately though, I think it's kind of overlong and a little bit boring, so sort of a mixed bag. It's still stronger than some of the competition here, and like I said, I can enjoy it to an extent, so it landed at great tier. Then we have Phlebotomized with Immense Intense Suspense. The debut full-length from this Netherlands band who at the time of recording this just dropped their latest record last year in 2023. Another one where it's interesting to contrast that with their beginnings, which here are much more avant-garde and atmospheric, incorporating some clean vocals, strings, synths, and often jarring transitions. When you least expect it, they'll go from contemplative doom to full-tilt death metal and then back again. Love the gang vocal moments, too. This is the highest fan-rated album from them on Metal Storm, and once more I am glad that this series has exposed me to another new favorite that I might have otherwise continued to overlook. So just as much as I love seeing you all in the comments say like, wow, this album, I'd never heard it before, and now it's one of my favorites. That happens to me too on this one. So I'm putting Phlebotomized at fantastic. Then we have Gorefest with Erase.
Why are you yelling at me?
The third album from this Dutch band, going for a bit more of a death and roll sound that I find particularly rough with Jan's gravelly, almost yarly vocals. It's incredibly grating and ends up ruining most of this for me, which is a shame because there are some cool riffs and harmonized guitar leads. Good example of one rotten ingredient infecting and destroying what might otherwise be a tasty meal. So this is another one at meh. Might be my least favorite overall. I don't know. It's a toss-up. This is the worst meh tier of any of the videos so far, I would say. But then we have Sarcophago with Hate. Brazil's death thrash crew arguably only getting heavier here with some of the other bands we've previously covered gone, again, a bit soft and gothic at this point. Cemetery, I'm looking at you. That said, there are still some interesting atmospheric elements too. Dynamic but consistently dark and very engaging in its pacing. Great mix of thrash, death, and groove with a touch of doom and industrial for good measure over a lean 35 minutes. So this one went to fantastic, and I can already see that once again I made a mistake, and Grave is actually supposed to be at amazing. My bad, but it's just that good. I'm only doing 4 per tier. Next up we have Pungent Stench with Club Mondo Bizarre for members only. The third album from this Austrian death metal project, shifting to topics around BDSM, and somewhat fitting to this theme, the guitars have this kind of horny southern drawl to them that makes me feel like I need a shower. Another very death and roll sound you might compare on some level to Entombed's Wolverine Blues. Not the worst thing here, but definitely towards the bottom. The only album in this style I kind of enjoy is Carcass's Swan Song. For all the shit that album gets, it's still miles and miles better than this, I'm telling you. So this is just going to okay tier. Then there's Hypocrisy with The Fourth Dimension. This long-running Swedish band starting to evolve their sound in a more melodic direction, which is where I like them at. It opens on a very doomy note with gothic atmosphere I'd somewhat compare to Septicflesh, but then takes certain notes from the sounds that were coming out of Gothenburg as well. Some really strong proto-Amon Amarth energy on some of these tracks like Reborn and Never to Return. Certainly a big improvement from the previous 2 albums, in my opinion, so landed it at amazing. Then we have Brutal Truth with Need to Control. Now this is definitely more of a grindcore album, but there's enough death metal here to potentially warrant the inclusion, and given the overall fewer albums of this year, I said what the hell. This one starts off on an almost doom metal note as well with Collapse, which also conjures this really dark, menacing, hypnotic atmosphere with maybe just a hint of Godflesh in there as well, before unleashing hell with Black Door Mine, like pressure building up before the dam bursts. Definitely some jams here with I See Red and Choice of a New Generation, bringing those sick D beats. I put this one at good tier. And then we have Cannibal Corpse with The Bleeding. This was actually Cannibal Corpse's most successful album to date in terms of sales, and also the 5th top-selling death metal album in the US with over 98,000 copies sold. That number's probably gone up by now. It's also Chris Barnes' last album with the band and the first with Rob Barrett on guitar. Definitely moving into more of a groove-oriented sound with easier to understand vocals. Great opener with Staring Through the Eyes of the Dead, and another all-time classic here with Effed with a Knife. I'm going to be careful about saying these track names now because my Cannibal Corpse tier list did get limited ads, and I'm guessing it's mostly just due to saying some of the song titles and maybe some of the album art.
Don't censor him.
Pulverized certainly lives up to its name, leaning into the faster, more brutal style of the previous albums. Force-fed Broken Glass really putting the spotlight on Alex Webster's bass, and Paul's drumming as well. I also like the slower, more atmospheric moments like on Return to Flesh. This is my second favorite of the Barnes era and a must-listen for any death metal fan. I already love this album, but again, especially within the context of the time, I can see why they only exploded from here, because it's just miles above. Like, while some bands were like seriously deteriorating in quality, Cannibal Corpse was only on the onwards and upwards path. So of course this is going to perfection. Y'all check out this playlist for more death metal rankings, including 1990, 91, 92, and 93. And also, again, discography rankings for a good number of the bands on this list and many more. But let me know, again, down in the comments, what are your favorites? What are your least favorites? What albums would you add that I did not include? But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.